It was scheduled to be the second of our on-track conversations this semester. We ended up having to reschedule the first, so this is now our first on-track conversation of the semester, and I'm so happy to be having it with my friend, Peter Trummer, with whom I always have the most interesting conversations with weird twists and turns. So I'm Marrikka Trotter, as all of you know. I am the coordinator of history and theory here at SCI-Arc, and this semester I am actually teaching one of the 4 tracks. Peter is teaching another. My focus is on theory, nominally. Yours is on urbanism, nominally, although we all know that you're an accomplished theorist as well. Peter Trummer has a background in both architectural practice and in architectural theory. I have come to respect you as an architectural historian, in addition, and I always learn so much from your kind of joyous tromps through architectural history, particularly recent architectural history, where you were a participant, and so you always bring a very intimate perspective to these things that happened that shaped the discipline for us today. Also, we share certain mentors and certain ways of thinking. And perhaps one of the things that ties us together, and it always makes conversing with you so enjoyable for me, is that I think we both have a commitment to certain aspects of the relationism that we came out of, and a real delight in the discovery of object-oriented ontology. And neither one of us were prepared to see those things as oppositional. And I think I always enjoy your perspective on how things retain certain relational properties in architecture at the same time that we've come to respect them newly for their discrete properties as entities in their own right. Now, I know recently you've been doing some scholarly work as well as creative work, if those two things are ever really separate, on Piranesi. And in particular, you've been looking at Piranesi in plan view.
Plan view, yes. Plan
view is something that maybe has, until your own resuscitation of it, been a little bit out of fashion. We've been thinking a lot in section. We've also been thinking a lot in the kind of spinnable space of the digital, of the screen, and in the kind of multi-view that the screen so easily accommodates in current design software. So for you to go back to something that really needs to be read in plan and to talk about the plan as a section cut the other way is refreshing. Can you tell a little bit more about your work?
Well, first I have to say thanks for the introduction, and every time I'm sitting here I feel like I'm on a Freudian couch or somehow, you unreveal, something that you don't know if you want to be or you are, or basically, at least I feel always compelled to show you what I'm doing, somehow. And of course it's great to see Graham here, because I think some of the things that I have been doing recently, or the last 3 or 4 years, was to see, as we always do, how can we, re-originate some of the ideas that are given to us by philosophers and others into architecture. And I remember when Graham gave a lecture once in Innsbruck, I think it was, I think you called it zero form and zero function, I somehow thought I caught my intention, And the reason was, now 5 years later, of course, I had the opportunity, that I thought, well, how can I manifest that idea? I mean, what is going to be the entity on which I can test it, And so then I thought, well, I just go for the biggest thing architecture have, The plan that everyone talked about, The plan that is a kind of oracle, that, it's like the plan that totally withdraws from us. Everyone tried to make its thesis on that plan, So I thought, let's take this weird thing, and that's, of course, is the Piranesi plan, And so what comes out, I think, I don't know if it is, so just to know, it's part of this publication. What came out was, because what intrigued me in this idea was that the first time with this idea of the zero Piranesi, I could summarize my past, you know, and if you ask me what do, I just try to learn, you know, in what stage I am. And what I meant by that is I made this little diagram, and somehow this diagram helped me, due to the introduction of some of Graham's notion, to see how could I read 20th century architecture, you know, and why, and what is it that I'm doing? Because perhaps this is the only question I'm always asking myself, what is it really that I'm doing, yeah? And what somehow dissatisfied me before. So you see, in this diagram, I always thought, you know, here I could explain how I saw the 20th century. You know, when form follows function, I knew this is modernism, that's the idea of space, you know. So plan was the instrument of that, yeah? Then we had the other side where we said, no, this is too much, you know, we don't need content, we don't need function, we only have a form, yeah? This is the form of practice, we reduce everything to the form. And then we had the other one, which I always thought is the European side, you know, the Tschumi side. They said, no, form doesn't matter, it's only the event. But then I thought, when Graham came, then I thought, but perhaps there is another thing, and that is a zero form and a zero content, which means the thing that withdraws from us and we have no access. So I formulated this idea that in here, what would be a zero Piranesi could look like? Now, here it goes. So I took the Piranesi, and then I thought, let's look at all the people that had a thesis on that Piranesi. Yeah? Let's look at all the people that thought they have a subject viewpoint. Yeah? And let's draw the inaccessible of all these thoughts. Yeah? So then I went and basically redraw the Piranesi plan, and then I looked to the different authors, yeah, with their thesis and reread them. So this would be the Piranesi from the viewpoint of Vitruvius, yeah, you know, and his obsession of symmetries, yeah. Then there would be Piranesi from the viewpoint of Le Corbusier, you know, and his obsession to Polians. Yeah? So each time what I wanted to do is I take of these authors, read the Piranesi, and it unreveals another Piranesi that I didn't know. Then I thought I read it through the eyes of Eisenman, the subjective grids, you know, and then you see suddenly the Piranesi unfolds a multiplicity of subjectivity. And then I thought I read it through Aureli's walls, yeah? And so the Piranesi had all these walls, and then I read it through Colin Rowe's Bouchers, you know, yeah, and yeah, you find this little Boucher. And then I read it through Ungers' House in the House, yeah? And then I read it through John Hejduk and Kipner's Mask, yeah? And then I read it through Tschumi's Events, yeah? And then I basically, you know, put a zero Piranesi. This is the, so which means basically is that one that we didn't know, yeah, and we tried to discover, and that would be all these theses. But while I was doing that, I thought, well, is there another idea that I can look into plans? Now I have always looked at it from a subject point of view, someone that had an idea. But is there also a chance to read a plan from another plan? And so that is then this article that comes out, you know. I wanted to see, can I look it through another plan, and they called it object plan. So I took the Piranesi plan, and then I thought, let's look at it through the eyes of the Manhattan Commissioner plan, yeah? And then, you know, of the subdivision plan of land. And what you get suddenly is this very strange idea of land pieces that would not form any economics. Yeah? It would need a totally new law. It would need a completely new idea. It would unreveal qualities we would not have a legal system for. Yeah? And so then I thought, well, this is what I'm going to go to engage in the idea of an object plan, or how I call it in the idea when the Campus Martius plan from 1762 met the Commissioner plan, yeah, of 1811 of Manhattan. And so this is what I'm working now on, yeah, and I hope that I can start to develop a kind of, let's say, pedagogy out of the thoughts that we got introduced by people like Graham and others.
You know, it's interesting because one of the things that I know from reading other things that you've written and from your own anecdotes has been a long-standing concern on your part, and I think it's a long-standing concern of many architects, but very few of them have articulated it the way you have, is this idea that somehow authorship feels more comfortable at least once or twice removed from yourself. So you remarked one time, kind of anecdotally, about sitting down with your dad in front of an early computer. And you were asking, well, what can this do, I think? I'm paraphrasing, but you said something like, what can this do? And your dad said to you, you have to tell it what to do. It takes commands. It's not going to do anything by itself. And you expressed to me the disappointment that you felt at that moment.
I was young.
Yeah. I think even here, I wonder if the idea of a time-traveling plan meeting another plan and somehow a relationship developing between the two of them, if this is a really sophisticated technique for diffusing authorship in a particular way.
I have to come back to this constant question that I'm governing in me, yeah, and that schizophrenic conflict. Yeah, what am I doing when I am an architect? What is it that I'm doing? This is the question that I've asked my whole life. Yeah, and I think I often repeated it. You know, it's a situation that even people like Eisenman shares. What do you do with a white piece of paper in front of you or a screen? Yeah. Mm. So, trained historically, I had these two, conflicts in me. Mm. On the one hand side, I come from a culture of totally expressionism. Yeah, I mean, no theory, nothing. You know, it just goes out. It just goes out. Yeah, there was even a speech when I grew up. Yeah, which was, I see, if you do Austrian architecture, it was architecture from the stomach. Yeah,
God.
You know. Yeah, like a stomach architecture with detail, with tectonics, yeah? And I thought, wow, this is really great, you know, you could really do great stuff and the things look cool and it was flying around. But then, when I was thrown to the north of Europe once, yeah, I realized that this was really forbidden. This was forbidden. This was politically incorrect to be an expressionist. It was like a Bruno Taut, I would even say, national. I mean, you're just terribly bad. So then I got confused with the idea that goes then back to the, you know, Monet and others and says, no, you're not an architect. You are just using types. Mm-hmm. You shouldn't even do anything. Yeah, there is already a pre-given, yeah, that is given already produced by culture. Yeah, and you basically redraw that. So in this conflict, yeah. And then I think I got interested in the city, that the city basically, I think this was a debate once we had here, as a hyper-object produces this architecture. I asked then, what am I doing? And so, of course, I have to say I got dissatisfied with both positions, yeah? And more or less discovered, and of course this has a little bit to do also with a debate with Simondon, you know, when he wrote in the 50s. I mean, this was the beginning where there is an autonomy of machines, yeah? There's an autonomy of entities, yeah? That have a life on themselves, yeah? And I thought, can I think architecture as having such an autonomy, a life on itself, yeah? But then, of course, still, I have to do something. And so then, this David introduced me to these nice people, you know, with the 3 O's. And then I realized, hey, what I saw suddenly there, yeah, was that perhaps there is an explanation, yeah, that entities can meet and produce something else, but it needs someone like a subject that brings these entities, yeah, together. And that's a little bit what I have tried to work recently, yeah, and I got really comfortable, yeah, because I am part of that, but I'm not important, yeah. And
Right,
so
the
I found that
responsibility
really
doesn't-
interesting.
The responsibility doesn't totally rest on you.
It's not
you're
responsibility.
part of it.
I meant
Yeah.
I suddenly could the first time there is a multiplicity in every work.
Mm-hmm.
There's a population. There is not one thing. Yeah, and I think that's what I think this multiplicity of characters or multiplicity of things in a thing, but not saying that there is the life goes on without me having any interaction. This is what I'm looking for as a methodology.
Well, I think, so two things come to mind. One, of course, we now know scientifically that the gut is as important for our thought as our brains. So I think you could legitimately start to think about the kind of intelligence of the stomach, and not discount that. Yay nutritional science. And two, there is still an insistence in your work on the author, but it's a serial authorship that extends over time. So when you go through Campus Martius, for instance, you're saying, well, it's Piranesi according to Eisenman, Piranesi according to Rowe, Piranesi according to Ungers.
Or any other.
Or any other, right? But it's a kind of litany of authorship over time. I wonder if there's room in your thinking for moving away from human authorship altogether, or at least setting that to one side and say, okay, there's a pile of history, of architectural history in particular, that's been dominated by these single voices. At least we've given them that respect in retrospect. But there are also all kinds of other things and forces in the world that could be said to have had bearing on architecture, architectural form, architectural content. Could you, in other words, could you expand your pile a little bit?
Yeah, I knew, always when you sit here, it goes deep. But, so for this afternoon debate, of course, I cannot deny that three people were confronting with me with the question, what is it that I'm doing? One is the Walter Benjamin question, the author is a producer. Mm-hmm. Yeah? The Roland Barthes question, the death of the author, mm-hmm. and Foucault's idea of what is an author. Yeah? Mm-hmm. I know you're there and you do something. Yeah, and so of course every work can be analyzed. Yeah, from any of these external viewpoints. You know what I mean? Yeah, mm-hmm. You could say. What labor does your work produce? Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can inexhaustibly. But this is what I liked. What Graham once said. This would be always an overmining thing. I would never take architecture serious. Perhaps I love architecture, And so my question was, how can I get close to architecture, to buildings, perhaps if you ask me what is really inherently in me, then I think I can feel there's something that I need the city, I need the concrete, I need the urban, I need the physical massive things around me. I think there is how does people call it, an individuation with a history with that.
Well, that's a very Simondonian term.
Oh, yeah, these days, But so I wanted to understand how can I understand that, for example, a Greek theater emerges, okay? How can I understand that a pencil tower came into existence? What is so interesting in this word pencil tower, and this is why it confronts me, is you don't name the architect or the company who did it. It becomes suddenly a type. Yeah, mm-hmm. I think that fascinates me. How does architecture come into life? Yeah, and I had this crazy idea in my last debate with Graham that I thought, if I look into a theater, if I look at with my dyslexic, legasthenic eyes, perhaps this is my problem. I just see things that, how is this one quarterback saying, ghosts? Yeah, perhaps I see ghosts. Yeah. where I thought when I see a theater, of course you can say it has the culture of the Greek and so on, but I see something different. I see a staircase meeting a topography, you know? And I cannot deny that suddenly there was always something before, yeah? That somehow became unified and became something else, yeah? And perhaps this is my trying to give that idea of looking into the world a kind of pedagogy, yeah, of architecture.
Yeah, I think the pedagogical aspect to your work is super clear, and I think it's also probably, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but probably why you have returned so insistently to the plan.
The plan is only, and this I have to say here, I got, it's recorded, huh? Of course you have to, okay, I make it polite. I have colleagues, not in the US, but mainly in Europe, yeah? Was a good one, eh? Yeah? Is that good stuff?
I think that's vague enough.
That have committed themselves to enter into the architectural faculties by saying everything is architecture, yeah? And I really started to hate this. I really felt terribly uncomfortable, yeah? Because first of all, it allowed that anything could go, yeah? Of course, at the same time, you know, so I wanted to draw a line, yeah? Because the interesting thing is that Hans Hollein, who wrote this article, yeah, never meant it like this. When he said everything is architecture, he just wanted to expand the field of architecture from a pure building practice into a cultural practice, yeah? And of course he was talking about spaces and things like that. But you should not forget, you have today an educational environment, which I would say in Europe, not in the US, but in Europe. We don't have a NAP, we would need a NAP there, yeah? So that everyone can do what they want. So what became architecture? Architecture became this rubbish bin, yeah? Where you could just do anything you like. So what I became interested in to say, no, I want to draw a boundary. I want to say architecture exists because I think if everything is architecture, architecture wouldn't exist. And then I said, I love building, so I want to declare myself, yeah, that I love architecture and I want to contribute to the discourse of buildings. It's that simple.
Yeah, it's interesting actually. I think this goes back to the authorship question, and I don't want this to overly dominate our discussion, but I do think there is that we at this moment in architecture as a discourse are confronting our own uneasiness relative to architecture as it has been defined since Alberti. Its disciplinary limits, its focus on types, its focus on, say, the orthographic sequence, plan, section, elevation, et cetera, and the litany of kind of very self-similar, let's put it that way, authors, one after another, building on a conversation that has seemed closed to other identities and other ways of knowing in the world. So now that is not to say, so I would say people in my class will know that I am firmly committed to my own love of architecture. I do also love architecture. I think that's something we have in common. And it sounds funny to say that in architecture school, but I think sometimes you have to say it, actually. And my own pushing every week for my own students to really look at architecture, actually look at it, to look at big, beautiful buildings that have aesthetic intent, that are expertly put together, that are thought through all the way, that are not kind of at the margins or at the periphery, but to really get a handle on what this is that we're supposed to all be enthusiastic about. And of course, here at SCI-Arc, we're quite lucky because we are, in general, very enthusiastic about our field. surprising as that is to
Yeah,
have
I
to
mean,
say. So, but,
Yeah.
on the other side, I think even just the very masterful recapitulation that you gave of all of the people, all of the authors who have looked at Piranesi over time, and the strict kind of disciplinary boundaries in which that conversation has happened, we are having a moment of uneasiness with that. And we're not sure yet where to go, and we're not sure yet how to address that. I personally am very much in the kind of Hollein camp of trying to expand rather than kind of excavate or throw away. But the fact remains that that is why we're seeing so much random stuff, I think, filtering into the discipline.
I just want to make clear, I'm not a nostalgic thing. There is a very interesting thing that through a conversation with David, and through a student of mine, a Russian student in Europe, she came across to Boris Groys, over the idea on the new, yeah? And it was a really interesting book on the question, of course, today a museum, what is a museum, what is a collection, in today's life, where life should produce art, why do we need an institution, this is like the worst thing you can have, and so on. And in this text, he came back to a Malevich article on the museum that I didn't know, where Malevich said, it went this well. Let's kill all art was before, we want to have a tabula rasa new. And then Groys says, yeah, but it's not so bad to have this museum because at least you know what you should not repeat, yeah? So, which I found an interesting thing. So what I see the discipline is not a discipline and it's kind of, is only what should not be repeated, yeah? What should not be in principle which is done, yeah.
But it's very strange.
So in order to understand,
but if that's your point of view, then it's very strange to go to Piranesi.
Oh, this is only because I needed the oracle, I needed this one plan that is hyper of everything, because you see, Piranesi didn't ask about all this analyze, yeah, that people have done afterwards. So Piranesi is a little bit what I think Foucault said in what is it? He made a new discipline, analyzing this plan, that no one knows how to access it. Yeah? Mm-hmm. So I think for the idea of the zero, it just worked for me because it's this constant, this one plan that everyone tries to understand, yeah, and no one even has any access to this. Yeah? I think it was more this plan that is out there, yeah, that constantly surrounds everything, but no one really can access it. Yeah? So this is to me the zero-ness that I think Graham once described, is this unrevealing of something in this plan that we never have thought the plan can be. Yeah? Mm-hmm. And so that's how I more or less saw it, and I just tried to find everyone who had something to say or that I could analyze it with. Yeah? I could do it differently as well. I mean, there could be, of course, other people would make some scanning method, or I'm sure that Damian would come up with some Fouki AI stuff and would read some, yeah. But this was more on that level, yeah.
So then so if there's no nostalgia in the project, which I find hard to believe, actually, but let's just say there's no nostalgia in the project, then why the commitment to the plan? Why not take Piranesi?
That's a very interesting, because you see, I have a slide for you. Yeah?
Okay.
I think before we say why I'm interested in the plan, we should say what killed the plan, okay?
Okay.
So there was a moment, and I want to show you, that I think killed the plan. So I had all this fantastic presentation, yeah, just to know.
And I
skipped it, yeah, of course. No. So this killed the plan, yeah. So I think this moment, the duck, yeah, the Venturi duck, killed the plan, yeah. And I think it is really interesting, yeah, that everyone in the moment of the discipline of architecture could say that with Venturi's idea of complexity and contradiction, yeah, that architecture is that the building is a mode of communication, yeah, a semological entity, yeah. It killed basically the idea to plan. But the funny thing is what I saw in the plan. This is perhaps our unsophisticated European reading. Yeah? But what interesting, or at least to some people, but what could you see is that the shift in architecture was not anymore about how to organize space, what I would say Mies van der Rohe, Le Corbusier, would do, but it was basically there was an audience, yeah, and that audience was the city, the collective, the thing that is larger, yeah, the object as a mediator, yeah. But what I found interesting in the debate of the withdrawn object or the strange object, that the plan in itself can never be experienced. This is my, this is what I learned from Aureli. I mean, the plan, but in the plan, everything is inscribed. The regimes of norms. We know the quick corner office landscape because of a plan. We know formalism because of a plan. Le Corbusier's 4 diagrams, is a plan diagram. Yeah? We know architects only because they did plans. Miralles would be nothing. He only did plans. Yeah? We only know plans. So there was this interesting thing that I think that coming back to some of the debate, what is a kind of background architecture, yeah? Then I thought the plan is the background. Now, of course, the plan has formal things, but in the plan, and I think this is interesting what Le Corbusier said, the plan is the generator for anything to come. So this idea, perhaps, to use the plan as the most I mean, look, I'm also surrounded by words. Is the hyper object of architecture? Is the one that is, in which all is inscribed? No, I mean, this is.
So I agree. I see what you're saying. I too. The thing that I love about plans, and the reason I was making a funny face at you when you were talking about Venturi killing the plan. Now, I mean, that particular the duck maybe, but. I hadn't thought about that before, and I think it's really interesting. But for me, when I was a student and I read Complexity and Contradiction for the first time, actually Venturi was one of the people that first taught me how to read plans, weirdly. So I'm thinking particularly of the section that he has on I think it's like liners and pochés, where he's talking about a column, a colonnade, a portico surrounding a solid structure on the inside. That's a kind of lining, or that what happens in a castle typology is another fortification. A very thick poché is another kind of lining, or even the notion that you could go into a kind of deep interior, like Josephine Bonaparte's a bedroom in Malmaison, and see her little canopied bed as kind of an interior within an interior. The way that he described it to me was all in plan. And it was in Venturi's own work, for instance, in his extension for the National Gallery in London, that I could see for the first time as a young architect the power of the plan, sort of setting one up for something that didn't arrive, in that case, very famously. And yet, so that difference aside, the idea that there is a kind of unknown or unapproachable quality, a kind of hidden reserve, let's say, in any formal orthographic drawing in architecture is utterly fundamentally true. For instance, in my own research, when I was looking at the kind of the origins of the geological imagination in the 18th century, geologists as a fledgling field of science actually turned to architects because architects understood things in an abstract sectional way, in a way that actually trained scientists at the time didn't understand. And so they could cut sections of the earth and they could imagine the earth as a three-dimensional structure, entirely imaginary, impossible to ever understand except as a mental picture that one was able to produce through a kind of abstract spatial imagination, and therefore access new ideas about how the earth might have come together, how it might have been formed, how it might still be forming or eroding. So there is a kind of power there to these very strange types of images that we make, or types of pictures that we make, that need to be decoded that need special knowledge to be able to understood. And surely there is always an excess that goes with that. There's always a kind of residue of kind of dark, weird stuff that gets pulled from plan to plan, like in each one of the examples that you showed in this kind of litany of different people thinking about Piranesi, that's not fully processed by the author, but that just kind of keeps being dragged along, the building up of wealth, let's say, the building up of architectural wealth. And surely I too am very fond of that production of knowledge from the orthographic sequence. However, nowadays, as far as I know, the plan is no longer the generator. As far as I know, students today make plans by cutting through models. And actually architects, practicing architects today are no longer starting from the plan in the same way that they used to. And so that's where I think there's this kind of residue of nostalgia that to me, by the way, is not a bad thing. To me, it just places you, like I said, it makes me respect you as a historian as well as a theorist.
Thank you.
that was quite an eye roll.
You know, it's not, I'm not. You see, of course, if you go in rabbit, it's clear that what I do is I assemble parts. You know, I'm not in plan. But what I mean by plan is more not so much the projection and goes back to its means of expression. It's more anything, yeah, that unreveals an architecture or goes through the plane, you know? I mean, for example, the regimes of escape, the orchestration of function, the way events take place. So there's, in the plan, there is all this life, you know, that goes into a plan. Yeah? There's all the norms, there's all the cultural references. So perhaps it's, I'm not saying that it is not a section in 3D, but it's this instrument that has a signature, you know, of everyone signifying. But also because, and this was a debate that I had with Tom, you know, when I, you know, recently about these snow clouds, and I always thought, oh, interesting, why?
By snow clouds, he means snow globes.
Oh, okay, okay. Anyhow, and I always, I did not really, I didn't know how to tackle this thing until I realized perhaps because the city is what I'm drawn to, yeah? All my architecture comes from that entity, yeah? And so in order to weapon myself as an argument, you know, and of course I have to finish my PhD, I suddenly came across Benevolo's book, and I was really fascinated, yeah? When Benevolo wrote that when the city drew a wall, basically a form that divides between inside and outside, which is a plan thing, yeah? Yes. And the knowledge of the territory was gone, and a new knowledge appeared, yeah? And that's the knowledge between the walls, and that's architecture, yeah? You know, and I thought, yeah, here we, so that's why I always thought, before the city there was no architecture, there were, you know, hard shelters, tents, you know, and all this stuff, yeah? Yeah? But the idea that you suddenly draw a wall, I think that is an...
Well, I mean, I guess I would, first of all, I feel like you bring such an intellectual commitment.
I just bring the boring into architecture.
No, you bring such an intellectual commitment to a particular view of architecture that I find really, you know, intriguing and rich. And
this is called the late work. The late work. I'm in my late work. You know, I cannot be young anymore. I cannot be in the middle.
This is when you achieve full enlightenment.
No. No. It's just, you know, it's just what. But
I wasn't. That was a compliment that I was setting up to then continue my critique.
Please. Also unpopular.
No, I don't think it's unpopular. I think it continues to be a rich vein to mine, and I want you to stay committed to it, and I want you never to waver from it. Now, from my standpoint, I would say I think we absolutely had some kind of architecture before we had the city. And I think also the notion that the wall is a fundamental of architecture is a historical bracket that the other part of that bracket may be closing, actually. So I think it started at a particular moment, maybe with the star fortification.
You see, the cave didn't have a door, yeah? Okay?
I don't think you need to have a door to make something architecture.
I learned that for the digital project. They didn't know how to make a door.
Yeah.
So I thought they also didn't have a door, thanks to Graham, who reminded us that architecture needs a door. It is a world cut out of the world. I think it's absolutely fantastic definition.
I think there are some ways that you can cut things out of other things, though, without making a complete enclosure. So, for instance, even in very early Neolithic monuments, the idea that you take a piece of the earth and you separate it out and you lift it up, already, I think, is creating the sense of something sacred and something different and something separate, something even discrete. And therefore, to me, I'm just coming at it from a slightly different point of view. That I think that one way to think of architecture is that it's bound up with the city, and another way to think of architecture is that it's this kind of cultural separateness, which is already, again, talking about separate worlds. You and I deeply agree on that. I am committed to the idea that one of the most awesome things that architecture can do is to make a special place.
Well, you see, I mean, it's interesting that actually it needs to be always other people than people within architecture that we start to adore architecture again. Yeah. So, and I think this is a little bit, to me, the thankfulness to what happened in the discipline of philosophy, by people like Graham or others, because suddenly they remind us, and I even can say this to computer programming, that I have a friend who says to me constantly, "Hey, Peter, can you tell me what architecture is? Because all my colleagues are called architects, And then the interesting thing is, if you ask a program, if you ask them, so what is then an architect or architecture in terms of programming? Very clear definition, Is the person who manifests an idea about the program. I thought, well, we should learn from these people, because we forgot it, And I think this is, something that I owe to Graham and others, because, of course, this debate is always long, that you have a ritual, this the Lowe's idea, you mark a place, you gather, they think, and all that stuff. But look what architects have done, they have done buildings, they cut through the earth, because that's how they translated Eisenman, is the Abraham, But essentially the idea that there is an interiority, and that interiority is expressed, in a certain way in a plan, I think, to me, Now, let's turn it around. If you start with only a rock, or only a solid, or something, you need to screw something in. I think the interiority of architecture is a necessity, to me, Or at least that's how it is debated in let's say the 19th century within the arts. When is something a sculpture and when it is architecture. And I think what I learned from Michael Osman, when he explained to me how I should read Hegel, then it's all about how the subject in space becomes subjectified, and then we see Shinko, who says, well, only when I stand in the plan and I look outside, there is a subjectification in me because I see the landscape. I mean, I'm just saying.
Well, even Hegel, though, started from what he assumed to be a solid.
So no, I don't know Hegel. It's more people tell me what Hegel, how you should read that. I have no idea. But the only thing what I want, Marrikka, is I just want to expand architecture to this amazing amount of things that is out there that we can work with. Yeah, and for this lecture today, I looked at Miralles again. Yeah, God, man, has he drawn plans? And perhaps to give access to the world that is possible with architecture. Perhaps this is what I want, and that there is enough within architecture that you can learn from, do from, explain the world with, yeah. And that's perhaps it's that we don't need. I mean, of course, you should know about what is happening in the world, but why not concentrate? And I have to say, when Zizek and Graham talked here, I found it really fascinating, So first, there are two philosophers talking in an architectural institute, and all the architects are hoping that two philosophers are going to talk about architecture. And what I saw? Two philosophers are talking about philosophy, yeah? And I said, yes, yeah? So let's talk architects about architecture, yeah? And not about something else. And I found others are people doing this, so why cannot we do this? And so I think that's, to me, I just want to...
I agree. So I hear what you're saying, and I totally agree. I do think it's surprising how many times architects are culturally curious. We are deeply interested in other disciplines as sources of inspiration and knowledge for our own field. But I think also we have to remember that we have a disciplinary expertise that we need to build and expand, and that we need to nurture.
Or renew.
It does often surprise and alarm me how difficult it can be to get people in supposedly expert positions to really talk about architecture. So that's something that I think we need to work on.
I think you're covering a real field. In a debate with Greg Lynn recently, or a couple of years ago, he said, look, when I studied architecture in the 80s or somehow, it was clear there was not only me, the architect, there was also historians, yeah? There were theorists, and they would all work on architecture. Yeah? I think what has vanished, that everyone has to become their own theorists, their own historians, their own promoter, their own, everything do it yourself. And I'm not saying that that we need to be a camp again or something, but it needs to be that we could share something. You see, it's interesting that in other, because now we have Graham as a philosopher here. In philosophy, I would say you also have to read, hopefully, key books, yeah? Why not in architecture demanding and say, well, in order to talk, here are these several books that, we are basing our knowledge on, yeah? I think today in Europe, architecture theory doesn't exist, architectural history doesn't exist, yeah? Perhaps there are few Italians, perhaps there are very few Italians, yeah? But then you have to find them, and they don't even know how to talk with each other. So what happens to me, and this is perhaps, I don't want to say I feel hurt, it seems like that we just let it go, yeah? And I think and you have to imagine how bizarre it is. A guy like Ram Koolhaas, trying to kill architecture his whole life, said in an interview recently, how we can gain from 3,000 years of architecture, Ram Koolhaas, becomes an architectural entrepreneur, I mean, really, And so, and I think I would just wish that we could talk about more about, because I think everyone uses, in a certain way, a cultural references, and entities that are built, for their work,
Well, I think it is true that we bring a certain disciplinary expertise to the world, and if we dissipate that, then we lose our ability to collectively make a difference in the world. I think Habermas sort of started that from that position.
I'm not.
Yeah, I know.
I don't understand these people.
Yeah, but I think his notion of how disciplines work in the public sphere is a useful one for our own field. The idea that I always pictured it as kind of blimps, like there were a whole bunch of disciplines or fields or areas of expertise that couldn't that needed to kind of keep some kind of, as you put it, interiority to them, that needed to keep something about them cohering or cohesive in order to be able to move around with any kind of impact.
What was interesting, when Jennifer Boner had her lecture, she made me again aware, yeah, of the difficulty of having this double project, you know, having a practice and having a discourse, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. And I think perhaps it's this division, yeah, that we think we have to talk to colleagues or clients the same as we talk to clients, you know, yeah, or at least that's what I have experienced in practice, yeah. And so I just wish that that we can divide them, you know, that the audiences are differently, yeah, and I guess this is not, I think people not explicitly clarify that, yeah.
Well, and I think this is where my own side, I mean, no, wait a second. I just realized something. You are on my side now. You are part of the discourse now. You're out of practice. You're part of the discourse. So actually, we can own this together. The history and theory side
I don't own a
has
discourse.
has done a terrible job recently in kind of talking in a serious way about architecture. We've done a pretty good job at talking lots of other things. We haven't done a good job talking about architecture. And one thing that I admire and learn from you every single time you talk is the way you make discourse work for architecture in a very real, in a very nuanced way. How does this touch the ground? What is the relationship of the inside here to the outside here? How does the corner work? How does the particular circulation through the building work? In a very real, concrete way. And I want to see more of that in architecture. So I hope that your pedagogical method is broadcast to the widest audience possible, because I would love nothing more than to welcome a whole school of new Trummers.
And you should not forget, Trummer doesn't exist. Trummer has stolen from everyone. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's
so
okay though.
I have.
We call that the German footnote.
No, I'm just saying. Everything I show you is not me. Is anyone that I think had anything to say about architecture, I never discriminated because I loved it, you know? And it didn't matter if this was whatever kind of history or come from, yeah?
And we'll let that be our last poetic word, I think. Thank you guys. Does anybody have any questions for us?
Thank you.